Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. At the time I'm recording this video, it is about 60 hours until we get started in the Return of the Ancestors event. This is going to combine the Phrecia Ascendancies, the special Ascendancies that only existed during a couple of special events Grinding games have run. And on top of that, it's going to see a return of the Trials of the Ancestors content. More on that in a later video. And on top of that, it's going to have some cool new tattoos that are available. I'm going to put up one of these tattoos now, the Forbidden Tattoo of the Ranger on screen. What this is going to do is it's going to allow you to do two things. Firstly, it's going to allow you to change a notable in your character's passive tree, at least in your Ascendancy tree, into something at random from one of the base game Ranger Ascendancies. Note that this is the base game Ranger Ascendancies. This is not the Phrecia ones. So for instance, you might end up getting the Deadeye's Chain notable if you're reasonably lucky, or if you're a bit less unlucky, you might be playing a build that's dealing fire damage and get one of the Pathfinder's Poison notables. That might be of a bit less use to you. At the same time, it also allows you to essentially erase the text of an existing notable. And what I want to do in this video is go through a number of the Ascendancies that get quite a lot stronger, because one of the things that's holding them back is tremendous drawbacks that are found on some of these notables. You might be asking, how am I looking at this in Path of Building at the moment? So you'll need Path of Building 1 Community Fork, and down in the bottom, you'll have this option for version. On that, you want to select 3.28 alternate. Once you do that, you will not see the core game Ascendancies, you will see the special ones instead. The first Ascendancy I want to talk about is the Antiquarian. The Antiquarian is a bit of an oddball, in that it is a marauder that has a lot of things that just aren't very strength aligned. I mean, there is strength involved in them, but at the same time, there's things that relate to spellcasting and ward and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff like that. The core of the Antiquarian Ascendancy is Kalguran armor, gain ward instead of 50% of armor and evasion rating from equipped body armor, Starlight Reflector, which makes your ward better quite a lot, and also Runic Tablet. Gain Adrenaline, this is now 20 seconds. It was 10 seconds the first time this was introduced, but it is now 20 seconds. So this cluster is generic good stuff if your build cares about ward. And honestly, if you don't care about ward, don't play an Antiquarian. But then we have the other sides of the tree, and these entered into by very terrible nodes. You have no intelligence. This doesn't just mean, by default, that you can't use blue skill gems and blue support gems. It means that a whole lot of other gems are not available to you. For instance, it knocks out almost all of the Heralds from being able to be used. It knocks out a lot of support gems that you might consider to be not very attack themed. And as a result, it ends up being just an absolute build warping pile of garbage. On top of that, the thing that it gates that's actually unique, Whale-Tooth Bangle, 1% increased skill effect duration per 10 strength. This actually benefits intelligence-based skills more than anything else. So a skill like Soul Rend that is a short duration damage over time, that gets absolutely massively buffed by this, except you can't cast it because you've got no intelligence. Now you could previously circumvent this through the use of the unique Timeless Jewel that would then allow you to gain Supreme Ostentation, which has a text, you gain no benefit from attributes, but you also don't have to meet attribute requirements. So you can make this work via other means. However, in this event only, you can tattoo over something like Goliath Knuckle if you want to get to something behind it. So this is a new option that you've got available on the Antiquarian. There's also Goliath Knuckle and there's Lionized Hair. Lionized Hair's drawback is less severe, but also the upside isn't so great either. And 50% reduced dexterity, it's a problem. It's not insurmountable. That gates a couple of interesting things. First one of these is bow related, grants you fast shot. And the other one of these is Lionized Shield, which is defense related, and it is actually a fairly good node, but I'm just not sure that I'd be willing to spend 4 points for 60% overwrite on block on your shield. The Antiquarian is better as a result of these changes, but it's not out of sight better. That gets to change, however, when we take a look at what's happening to the Behemoth. The Behemoth has a mandatory first node that is crushingly bad once your character is powerful. So, 10% increased character size, lol. Your aura skills are disabled. This is a huge drawback. Your war cries are disabled. This is a huge drawback, and it affects the builds that probably were using the least auras. Spell skills deal no damage, but your upside, you have Rampage, and your melee hits count as Rampage kills. Rampage is a very powerful mechanic. If you kill enemies in quick succession, and melee hits are counting as Rampage kills, so if you hit enemies in rapid succession as well in melee, then you're going to build up quite a lot of these Rampage stacks. So that's the upside here. The drawback though, no auras. Now this means that you can't provide your own grace and determination. Keep this one in mind for later. But this also means that if you're able to overwrite this through the use of one of these new tattoos, then you can provide your own determination and grace because you no longer have the line of text, your aura skills are disabled. Editing Gog here. Sometimes you forget something important. When I was recording this, I forgot to mention that this is one of the few nodes in this Ascendancy that is really strictly tied to melee attacks. A lot of things later are going to provide generic attack bonuses or just generic character bonuses. Now, because Rampager is there, in general, you've had to go melee on a Behemoth. You haven't had any other choice. But now it's the case that yes, you can still go melee, but you're not forced into it as much. That'll be important later when we start talking about some of the ranged options that are going to exist for ranged armor stackers, a build that has never existed before in Path of Exile in any real sense. This is the starting point. This is a very good node when you get it at level 33. It is a utterly terrible node by the time you hit about level 85, and your character has just outgrown the power that you're gaining from this, and really wishes that it could have some of those juicy auras that everyone else is running around with. And also potentially spell skills dealing damage on the side as well. So that's the starting point. What do you get after that though, in terms of this Ascendancy? Now there are 3 different pathways that I think are strong, and one that I think is more of a meme. Let's start with the one that's a meme, Final Blow. This I would take as your second Ascendancy if and only if you happen to come across a Facebreaker in progression. Don't bother trading for it, but if you happen to loot one yourself, maybe you would allocate this and just place Facebreaker Cyclone until maybe a 4th Labyrinth. But then at that point, you're going to unspec this anyway, and you're going to pick something else. I am not sold that there is a complete package for Facebreaker crit here. And Facebreaker, you just don't have as much damage as a good weapon these days. Final Blow, meme tier only, pick it up if you happen to get it early. But then we have the more interesting sections. The first one is for those of you that are considering playing Vaal Double Strike or Vaal Lightning Strike or Vaal Volcanic Fissure. And there might be other options as well, maybe Vaal Ground Slam as well. Just keep in mind that you're not able to use your Warcries, so your slams are not going to be very good on their own, but the Vaal versions might make up for it. That's something we've got to play around with. Sheer Fury, explosive rage gain and an increase to maximum rage. Then, Fueled by Hate allows you to expend rage in order to power your Vaal skills. However, you cannot gain rage during soul gain prevention. This means that once you have spent that rage, you're not gaining it back for about 8 seconds after most skills. You're not going to be able to be spamming them non-stop. That's something to consider, but I don't think that this is the area I'm excited by. Neither is this other one. This is just generic good stuff. Fortification. Melee hits Fortify. This is a fantastic mod. Regen 0.2% of life per second per fortification. This is fantastic. Helps make up for not being able to use Vitality, for all the other sorts of things that are going wrong with the Ascendancy. Then you pick up Tireless Frenzy. Attack speed based on your fortification is really nice. 10 maximum fortification. All of this is good stuff. But I think we can do better. The area that I think really opens up new build options in the Behemoth, and these were not possible in the past, are Mental Conditioning. This gives you a tremendous amount of additional mana and then converts almost all of that mana into armor. And then beyond it, Steel Willed. This is the decisive thing. This gives you the ability to access a mod that previously was only available on a terrible weapon, Replica Dreamfeather. Replica Dreamfeather, though, this mod is so strong that it ends up being a good weapon anyway. So let's talk Replica Dreamfeather. This item has the text 1% increased attack damage per 450 armor. Note that this is an increased damage. This stacks linearly, not multiplicatively, with other things like elemental damage with attacks on your belt, or anything along those sorts of lines. Things on your character power passive tree that give increased attack damage, or increased generic damage, or increased elemental damage. You all just add them up. Now with Replica Dreamfeather, the benefit of this is that you can get this number not just into the hundreds, but into the thousands. If you're running around with 100,000 armor, you're going to be getting 222% increased attack damage. as a reward for having that 100,000 armor. This isn't wasting that armor either. You've still got it there. So 100,000 armor is enough that you can shrug off a critical hit slam from the regular Shaper. You're still going to go splat to an Uber Shaper slam, even if it's not a critical. But you'll probably survive a regular Shaper critical strike slam. Then you can upgrade further past that. Start getting to 250,000, getting to 500,000, and you're starting to look at getting more like 1,000% increased attack damage. Well, that's Replica Dreamfeather. Behemoth has given you twice this bonus. So instead, you're going to be getting something like 2,000% increased attack damage if you can get 450,000 armor on your character. But now that you're able to provide your own grace and your own determination, it used to be possible that a Behemoth could get there, but they required an external aurabot. You no longer require the external aurabot. You can just simply get there yourself. You don't need Replica Dreamfeather, you can use a real weapon. But perhaps most interestingly of all, nothing at all about this mod requires you to be using a melee weapon. You can use this with a bow. You can use this with a wand. And ultimately, I think it is going to be a wand. That's where you're going to want to be most of the time. Not saying it's the only option, but it's one of the spots that I was considering. Another thing, though, that also jumped out to me as potentially interesting, you want to use a high DPS weapon, one of the highest DPS weapons in the game, at least if you're willing to strength stack, or if you're on an Ascendancy that can strength stack, one of the highest DPS weapons in the game is, of course, Brutus's Lead Sprinkler. So you've got that as another option as well. So many choices here just by the fact that you are not tethered to using this particular bad sword in order to get this crazy powerful mod. And really, that is Behemoth's strongest aspect now. This is the thing that sets it apart from every other option in the game. This is the thing that is exciting me to try and come up with something for this event. So if you ever wanted to play an armor stacking wand build, then this is probably going to be one of the only chances you get to do it. Remember, though, that a lot of this is going to be dependent upon getting grace and determination, and you can't use grace and determination until you get a tattoo to obliterate the Rampager node. And yeah, this takes an editing god comment. In case you weren't sure exactly why grace would matter here, Iron Reflexes is a keystone that converts all evasion rating into armor, and it does so in quite a favorable way. It means that the boost that you get from grace ends up being really, really multiplicative with the amount of armor that you've got. So, Iron Reflexes, you're definitely going to need this in here. On top of this, you also have Incorruptible as a defensive option. In conjunction with Divine Flesh, which is a notable that is only available in conjunction with Jabaqua-themed Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewels, then you will become pretty hard to kill for chaos damage. Let's just say that. And Divine Flesh is then going to turn 50% of the elemental damage that you suffer into being chaos damage as well. All of this can provide a lot of defense on your character at the same time as you're scaling a tremendous amount of attack damage. What's not solved here is, do you go critical strike based or do you not go critical strike based? That's something we've got to work out. And also, do you end up speccing Incorruptible or do you not spec Incorruptible? If you do spec Incorruptible, then you can't pick up Sheer Fury, which might otherwise be good, but ultimately that's going to be depending on the type of attack you're doing. Dire Rampart's only melee hits as well, so there's a bunch of things you can play around with there. Finally, whatever it is that you end up getting that replaces Rampager might or might not synergize with the rest of your setup. I think there'd be some things that would be absolutely spectacular if you hit them, but that are reasonably unlikely to hit. Lots to think about there, but ultimately I think that this is probably the Ascendancy that gains the most from the addition of the tattoos. It's either this or it's one we'll come to in a sec. Also, don't forget the unique helmet Refuge in Isolation exists. It is an option for your Behemoth, but it is not something you necessarily need to use. It's just something that you might consider. So, from the great to the improved, but not improved enough to be good. Unfortunately, the Blind Prophet is a lot worse than it used to be. This was a dominant Ascendancy the first time the Phrecia Ascendancies were around. Unfortunately, the game has changed since then. Sightless. This used to read 12%, it's now 9%. On top of this, the wands that you're probably using with this, they all got their base critical strike chance increased, and as a result, Sightless is now actually a net negative for a lot of these builds. Now, were this still 12% and were wands still where they were, I think you might consider taking this. You might consider playing this Ascendancy and then taking Directionless early, but with a view that once you're able to secure yourself the unique item Nimbus, which is an endgame drop from one of the Uber Eldritch bosses, then at that point, you would tattoo over Directionless because Nimbus is just strictly better than it, and you would then put something else there. You get a good notable in its place. And then you'd take Careless, you'd take Sightless, and then something else. There's a lot of cool stuff in this Ascendancy, but Restless is just solid. It's not anything great. Most of the time, you're not that interested in taking it. Shapeless is just solid, hard to call fantastic, and Lightless is very, very build specific. Ultimately, hard Ascendancy to build around, but you really kind of want to tattoo over 2 of these, and you're only allowed to tattoo over 1 of them. So I'm kind of not sold on the Blind Prophet. Next up, I wanted to talk about the Herald. So the Herald is really funny, especially the Path of Building implementation here. This looks like it's Herald related. It's actually the Harbinger, and it's something that just looks like it's Herald related because the text is similar to HO something. That's all the Harbinger text in there. The key thing you need to know here is that you have an option you didn't have before. If you're playing Herald of Agony, you probably require this 200% increased mana reservation efficiency of Herald skills. You can compromise, and you can run a maximum links Herald of Agony setup, but you're going to probably need to sacrifice returning projectiles and fit in Eclipse instead. If you do that, Eclipse is a reasonably good support, but it is worse than returning projectiles, I think. Then that will help reduce the amount that your reservation has exploded. Because most of the time on those Herald builds, you're going to be using a Mirage coin in order to empower your Herald of Agony. You're also going to be socketing the thing into the unique chess piece, Lionized Vision. Lionized Vision is just really, really good, and it's an extra link, and so it ends up being fantastic for this build. But with that in mind, you do actually have to pay all that extra reservation. The 200% MRE that you get from Coming Calamity is enough to do it, but without that, you then have to spec hard into that. So if you're playing Herald of Agony, probably don't tattoo over Coming Calamity. There's also another little problem that people may have thought of. Oh, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take Future Nostalgia, and I'm going to spec the way people normally do on this Ascendancy for Herald of Agony, and then I'm going to tattoo over Future Nostalgia because it's the weakest of the notables. And yes, it is the weakest of the nodes, but the problem is you can't tattoo over this because GGG's FAQ says that you can't. You can't tattoo over multi-selectors, and you also can't tattoo over one more category we'll get to later when we talk about the Aristocrat. So this is the classic way of building a Herald of Agony character on the Herald, and ultimately Apocalypse is strong, but you're probably forced to tattoo over that if you tattoo over anything. And also there's also the Lycia bloodline can be another option there. What I wanted to really explore here is the option of doing something quite different, and that is going to Persecution. And here with Persecution, you're going to pick up one of the others. Let's just say it's the Herald of Ice one. You're not required to take that. Here, though, you do want to tattoo over the Coming Calamity. Doesn't really matter what you get. So you tattoo over this. Let's say you get really lucky and you get the Golem node from the Elementalist. So you use a Witch tattoo, you get the Golem node from the Elementalist. Then at this point, the Coming Calamity is gone. So you can now have aura skills again. And you can then go for Purposeful Harbinger, which is found on cluster jewels that provide Herald effect. And so you can then end up getting a whole bunch of aura effect, up to 40% total, from having just one copy of this in conjunction with all of the Herald stacking package. I'm not convinced that this is going to necessarily work, but it's a new option that hasn't existed in the past. So it's something to consider. If you do go with this, first 2 points is a tattoo. Second 2 points is probably Future Fear or one of the other future nodes. Third point is Persecution. And your fourth point is definitely from the Lycia bloodline. So that's the Herald. There's the 2 ways that I can see of building that that are new now. The Gambler is the next Ascendancy to consider. Now, the Gambler gains a lot, but what the Gambler gains is actually not so much from the changes that have been taking place to the tattoos. They're a bonus to the Ascendancy. The main thing it gains is reversed odds. This has exactly the same text as it's always had, but what has changed is that it has the tremendous synergy with the newly added gem that gives you the same effect. Invert the Rules Support. This drops from the Maven, it drops from the Uber Maven, and it's not as rare as Eclipse Support. But it does seem to be a fairly uncommon gem, so solo Spellbound players don't try for this. But if you're playing in Trade League, you will be able to pick up Invert the Rules Support, and it'll give you 35% chance to treat enemy monster resistance values as inverted. Oh, that stacks with 50% here, and then maybe 15% from an Elemental Mastery somewhere on the tree. Elemental Masteries actually are not that common, and they're also in quite awkward spots. So we have, here's one of them. Here's the closest one to you. This is, hits have 15% chance to treat enemy monster resistance values as inverted. But once you've got 100% of this stat, and you can get it whatever combination you want, the key thing you do is you use all three of Purity of Fire, Purity of Lightning, and Purity of Ice. Once you've got these three, and you scale them up as much as you reasonably can, every monster that is around you would, if it gained the benefit of your auras, probably have a resistance value of at least 50%, but often 82, 83%, whatever your purity provides to maximum resistance. That's going to be their resistance value. And then you can then apply those purities to your enemies as well as yourself. So you get the defensive benefit of them, but the enemies also get the defensive benefit of them by using the Runegraft of Treachery. The Runegraft of Treachery is usually pretty cheap, maybe not in this league because it's quite a bit more useful than it's been in the past. And it's something that is then able to be applied to any mastery on your tree. And it will give you a mana reservation efficiency bonus, which is nice to have. But the main reason you're using it is to donate your auras to your enemies. Then you're inverting those resistances, and that is going to deal with your damage aspects. How are you going to be defensively? Well, you can either double down on damage if you want. You can take Growing Accumulator. At that point, you're kind of forced into taking Risk Aversion. It's the only good notable left. Or you could tattoo over something else, but I think what you do is you actually tattoo over Risky Exploit. So this is the first option for the gambler. You go tattoo over Risky Exploit, invert the rules, reversed odds, Elemental Mastery, all of that good stuff. Keep Risk Aversion as it is, keep Growing Accumulator as it is. Growing Accumulator is 26% more damage on average, and it tends to be a bit better in conjunction with Shock, but not at getting your shocks started. Once your shocks are established, it's better at maintaining them and will keep bigger ones, but it does have that little difficulty of getting them started. The other option, though, that you've got, you could instead go with reversed odds and then go with Tails. Tails provides you a tremendous defensive boost for attacks. You're going to end up having the ability to have 95.16% of attacks bounce off you. Now, you will have to build up to 78% block to get that, but you can do that. That's not super hard to do. Just equip a shield, pick a couple of shield clusters on the tree. However, you're not going to be able to build any spell block because your chance to block spells is going to be unlucky. At this point, what you want to do is come to the node near Cloth and Chain here. And in this spot, you want to use the green Nightmare Jewel. With this, and with tattooing a bunch of these dexterity nodes into cold resistance, then the Green Nightmare is going to provide you with 53% spell suppression. That's a starting point. That's 53. You want to get a bit more than that. And the spot that's easiest to get the rest of it is going to be from this cluster. So you've got Reflexes here. That's 10%. And then you've got 4, 4, 4. Don't need to take that node. 4%, 4%, 4%. And there's also the option of Mage Bane nearby as well. Like that may also be enough to get you there, but that's going to come at the expense of some evasion rating. So that's going to be what you're going to do to mitigate damage from spells. It's not going to be coming from your evasion or slipperiness or anything along those lines. It's going to be coming from spell suppression. You're going to be hit by every spell that lands on you. And actually, that's kind of not ideal in the Trials of the Ancestors mechanic, but at the same time, you're going to take 40% less damage from all of it. So that would be some of the ways that I would consider the Gambler. The Gambler has gained quite a bit out of this. However, I did also want to point out the Aristocrat because unfortunately, I think the Aristocrat is one that is not gaining some of the benefits that people think it is. Let's talk about the Aristocrat's Inherited Fortune node. This has the text grants 5 passive skill points. This is not very strong, and it would be an absolutely immediate choice to tattoo over it. However, let's bring up the FAQ again. And you'll notice here, I've just put up on the screen that this is no longer going to be something that you can tattoo over. And based on that, like the packages that people might have been interested in, like 40% increased int, 40% increased strength, pick up Dreadful Attitude, build some dexterity into the character the normal way to make Dreadful Attitude into a good mod, and then Inherited Fortune, try to roll the amazing notable that exists over in the starting area of the Inquisitor. So on the Inquisitor, there is a notable that's plus 50 int, plus 50 strength, and grants you an amount of critical strike chance equal to the lesser of your intelligence and your strength. So that notable would be incredible if you could replace Inherited Fortune with it, but unfortunately you can't. So that is the Aristocrat. Unfortunately, the thoughts that a lot of people have had just won't work on that. At least with the way that Grinding Gear Games' FAQ implies that you cannot tattoo over Inherited Fortune. If that were to change, then yeah, this would be a really, really solid setup. Now, a couple of other things that have got quite a bit better, but that I don't think actually get there as a result of getting better. Up in the top left of the tree, we have the Polytheist. And it might help if I just remove some of these. The Polytheist was not very good, and it does get quite a bit better as a result of being able to tattoo over things. But the problem with it is that it just doesn't quite have enough to make a cohesive package for either attack or spell builds. So let's start with this. Imagine that you're playing a Polytheist build. You're going to take Devout of Ralakesh as your first choices. This thing is actually crazy good. Like, this is probably one of the best 2-pointers available in the entire game. The problem is the rest of the Ascendancy doesn't live up to it. Now, if you're playing a spell build, and it's a spell projectile build or a spell nova build, Devout of Lunaris is an immediate next choice. If you're playing an attack build, you're going to be picking Devout of Rezlatha next. This is reasonably solid for an attack build. It's not extraordinary, but it's good. Then after that, you got a whole bunch of kind of not that inspiring choices to make. You got Devout of Ugal, generic good stuff, but not enough generic good stuff to warrant a full Ascendancy notable. Devout of Abrath, generic good stuff, not enough of it to warrant a full Ascendancy notable unless you're heavily spec'd into Fire.multi, and the rest of the Ascendancy doesn't build for that. You've got Devout of Solaris, which has a couple of synergies with one niche build we'll talk about in a sec. You got Devout of Garakan, which is just generic good stuff, but not a full Ascendancy notables worth power. You've got Devout of the Brine King, which is probably the best of the generic good stuff notables. Can it be chill? Can it be frozen? 10% max cold res. I like it. I think this is good, but I also don't think that it is a whole package node. And then you have Devout of Gruthkul, the troll node. This seems so good. 400 maximum life. Regenerate 8% of life per second. This is amazing, right? Enemies that have hit you with an attack recently have reduced attack speed. Oh. Your spells are disabled. Sorry. No auras for you. No heralds for you. Lose all those good things. And yes, you end up just completely and utterly wrecked by this. This node is basically obliterating your character's power when you take it. Even if you're not trying to build a spell-based build, it's going to obliterate you. So, with that in mind, your sort of package that you've got, like you can go Devout of Ralakesh, you can then go Devout of Rezlatha, Devout of the Brine King, and Devout of Lunaris. And then if you're playing attacks, then you tattoo over this. If you're playing spells, you tattoo over this. That's probably all you can do, and I just don't feel there's quite a whole package there. There's almost a package. There just needs to be one more generic good stuff node, and this would be good, but that node doesn't exist, and as a result, I'm just not sold on it. After this, we have the Puppeteer. This is possibly the thing that's getting buffed the most here. And that's going to be one of those ones that's funny because it doesn't look like it. So, the Puppeteer has an excellent looking node. Flesh Puppets. +5 to the level of all raised zombie gems. This sounds like it's a whole build in a can. Surely this is worth 4 points, right? Right? Well, let's have a look at the 2-pointer you got to take to get it normally, in the normal game. 30% increased maximum number of raised zombies. Hey, that's great. For each nearby corpse, 1% increased movement speed. Not great, but I'll take it. Raised zombie does not require a corpse. Yeah, that sounds all upside, doesn't it? And then you have the line that actually killed the Ascendancy in the past. Your raised zombies count as corpses. Why is this a problem? Well, a small number of monsters have the ability to detonate dead. And as hilarious as it is to have one of your zombies be exploded, you then promptly explode as well, because 90% fire resistance is not enough to survive that. So, every time you encounter a map that has this area is full of totems, you cannot go in it. If you do go in it, you're going to just get corpse detonated straight away. But even when it's not one of those maps, you're going to find that something is going to drop Detonate Dead, because there is a rare monster mod that is not that rare. It's not common, but it's not that rare, and it'll pop up and it'll just wreck your day. If you want to play the Puppeteer, you absolutely positively must tattoo over Graveyard Shift. Then you're able to take Flesh Puppets, which is a good node. And then you could potentially take Rotting Might and Feeding Frenzy. I am not convinced that this package is going to make a good zombie build, but it's probably the best zombie build you can make at the moment. And that's true even if you get something completely worthless over Graveyard Shift. So if you ended up getting a node that does absolutely nothing for you, like the projectile nodes on the Deadeye, at that point, you're still ending up looking like you've got a much better zombie build than is possible on the normal game servers. However, at the same time, there's a lot of other options that are available too. One that might be particularly interesting is Putrid Conscription. This has been boosted. Your minions spread Caustic Ground, dealing 40% of their maximum life as chaos damage per second. It is kind of hard to scale this effectively, but you might find there's just the odd minion that has an extraordinarily high amount of life that you could then potentially use this with. So there's a lot of things in here, but the main thing that makes this more interesting now is that Graveyard Shift being no longer such a severe example of griefing yourself means that Flesh Puppets can now be used. Anyways, those are the changes that I think are probably the most significant when it comes to some of the things that you can do. However, I did also want to mention a couple of specific things you might want to consider. So firstly, Foulborn the Anticipation was brought to my attention when I was discussing this on a live stream, and this is a budget-friendly item that if you're playing the Behemoth builds that we were discussing before, it has a very powerful conditional defense. So this defense is turned off unless you have blocked recently. Recently means in the last 4 seconds. But when it's turned on, you're going to have 11% of armor applying to each of your elemental resistances. This is a tremendous defensive layer, and this item tends to be cheap. And also, if you want to craft something better than this, there is also an essence, the Essence of Desolation, that has exactly this same ability on a shield. The numbers are smaller here. You would always divine this after you get it into a reasonable state, so we can just call it 4%. But 4% of armor applies to fire, cold, and lightning damage taken from hits if you have blocked recently. It is a very strong effect, but it's also one that requires a bit of messing around to find a good use case for it. I do have some ideas for making something as an endgame project if I do decide to roll with a Behemoth. I'm leaning towards that at the moment, and so I definitely have some plans for this, but it's just something I wanted to flag as an option that can be a powerful defensive choice, especially given that you can potentially use it in conjunction with wand attack builds. The other thing I wanted to point out is a couple of changes that came in fairly late to the FAQ. So I've already mentioned this one, that can I apply Ascendancy tattoos to multiple choice notables? No. Bloodline Ascendancy notables? No. Notables that grant passive points? No. So that's really important to know, especially the notables that grant passive points. That's one that people hadn't realized. If you are playing a Scion in this event, then the Scavenger Ascendancy, which is the Phrecia version of the Reliquarian from the normal game, it has a new non-multiple choice notable called Tabula Rasa. Don't know where this is granted, but it can have Ascendancy tattoos applied. I kind of got to see where this is. I am assuming that this is replacing the options for your third point. If that's the case, then I'm not sold on it. But if it is something that you can allocate for free, then maybe it ends up being a little bit better. But the other thing that's a big change, this was not present when I did my first video on this, the day that Grinding Gear Games put out the event. Will I be able to use Ascendancy tattoos in Standard after the event? No. No, you will not. They are exclusive to the Event League. This has been done because players did not want Standard hoarders transforming the market of the event. There are still a bunch of legacy tattoos that probably Standard players will be very keen to get their hands on, but they're not going to be the most important ones. The most important ones, of course, being these forbidden tattoos. Anyways, I'll leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.